The latency is definitely more stable. Oh, the ability to see, though, is not great. I really think I can feel it. Am I going to become a latency junkie?
When I built this 533 switchback, I selected the components to make it the most high-performance racing drone you could build at the time. I wanted to know for sure that the reason I was losing races and coming up low on the leaderboards was purely my own lack of skill and not anything about the hardware that was holding me back. But today, I'm going to do something a little bit heretical. This is the Walksnail Avatar HD Nano Kit V3. And until now, common wisdom has been that variable latency FPV systems like DJI and Walksnail are not great for racing because racers need consistent, smooth latency to make very precise, very repeatable turns. And that has meant that racers have pretty much stuck to analog and HD0. Yes, there are people out there who are racing with DJI and Walksnail, but I think everyone would agree that for racing, fixed latency is the best. And this new video transmitter comes with a firmware on it that has a racing mode. What is racing mode? I don't know, but I wonder if it means that Walksnail have finally delivered this fixed latency mode that they've sort of been hinting that they've been working on pretty much since the system released, but we haven't actually seen it. Oh my God, the only way to find out is for me to put the damn thing in this quadcopter and then take it out and fly it, and that's what we're gonna do today. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're gonna learn something today.
So what exactly makes this new video transmitter so perfect for racing, at least according to Walksnail? To answer that question, I have installed this firmware on a video transmitter and my goggles, and I want to show you that I am currently working with firmware 33.39.11. And the reason I show you that is, if history is any guide, I will do this video based on this pre-release firmware, and the day I release the video, Walksnail will release an updated, newer version that changes some things, and that's just how life has gone in the past. So if there's a new version when you're watching this, please know that I did my best. And the key thing that they have added here is the ability to switch here in the settings, the device settings, between standard and race mode. And the first thing I want to show you is if we go to the channel layout, and we can see, take a look at these channels and look at the frequencies there. Now I'm going to switch to racing mode. Notice now that my channel layout is labeled raceband 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the frequencies have been changed. They're only slightly different, but originally the Walksnail system used the same frequencies as the DJI system, and they're very close to the raceband channels, but not exactly the same as the raceband channels, and this can cause problems with race timing systems. When in race mode, the Walksnail system now has channels that exactly match the raceband channels. Another change that has occurred is that the bit rate is now locked at standard. We can no longer use high bit rate. And the idea there, I guess, is that it's going to give lower latency. I'm not really sure, but they lock it at standard bit rate, and the resolution is now 540p. And again, it is locked. Now, this is a new feature that we have never seen in Walksnail before. And you might ask the question, why would a lower resolution be better? Walksnail usually uses either 720 or 1080p. In general, the lower the resolution of the video feed, the more stable the video feed can be. And I think the idea here is that Walksnail wants to be able to give you the lowest latency possible, the most consistent latency possible. And by reducing the resolution to 540p, they're able to do that. We're going to take this outside and fly it, and we're going to see like what, I mean, it doesn't look so bad here on the bench, but I wonder how it's going to look when I actually start flying it. We're going to take it outside and we're going to see what it does a little later in the video. One other change that we shouldn't overlook is that the frame rate is locked at high, that is 100 frames per second. We can no longer change to 60 FPS, and that's actually going to potentially cause an issue. Yes, when you're racing, you definitely want the lowest latency possible, and so you always want to use high frame rate, but that does mean that the HDMI output from the goggles is always going to be at 100 frames per second. And for race directors, that could be an issue because there are very few capture cards or capture devices that can handle a 100 FPS signal. I've got right here the Elgato CamLink 4K. That is the only capture card I have been able to find that can capture a 720p 100 FPS signal, and that's how I am able to be recording this screen capture that you see me recording right now. There probably are other ones out there. I don't know what they are, And if you're a race director who wants to include Walksnail in your system, you're going to, if you want to DVR the Walksnail feed, you're going to want to be able to make sure that you can get that. I think it would be better if Walksnail made it possible to output 60 FPS from the goggle, the HDMI output, while still showing 100 FPS in the goggle. I realize that they could just do this with simple frame dropping, and I realize it would cause judder or jitter or stuttering in the HDMI output, but it would be better because then standard devices could pick it up. I don't even know if it's technically possible to do that, but it would be really good if they did. It would make it much easier to DVR races. But the real killer feature that people have been asking for literally since the day this system released is the ability to have a fixed latency mode. You see, Walksnail and DJI both have variable latency. They have the ability to retransmit lost data frames, and that means that the links are much more robust than something like HD0, which doesn't have the ability to retransmit lost data frames. With HD0, if you go behind a building and you lose some data, it's just gone. With DJI and Walksnail, they have the opportunity to try to retransmit it, and sometimes it gets through, but that results in an increase in latency. For racing, you want a fixed latency if you can possibly get it. And people have been saying, why can't you just use your magic engineering knowledge to make it fixed latency? When Walksnail said they were releasing a race-focused video transmitter, I hoped that we would have fixed latency, but it doesn't seem like that's the case, at least here on the bench. If we look in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, we can see the latency readout, and it's reading 22, 23, 22, 21 milliseconds. First of all, it doesn't seem any faster than before. So we haven't lowered the latency from something like 22 down to 19 or 17 or 16. And we can see it changing just here on the bench, so we can assume it's not a fixed latency either. But we still don't know. Maybe this 540 resolution mode will offer us more consistent latency than before, and the only way to know that is to take it outside and fly it, which we are going to do later in the video. But before we do that, we have to actually mount the damn thing inside a quadcopter, and the hope is that this new smaller VTX is going to be easier to mount than the big chunky boy from before. Well, that's the hope anyway.
The first thing you'll notice about the Nano VTX is that it's just a little bit smaller than the V2 VTX. We can see here the size is pretty close to the same, but not quite the same. Both of them have the same 20mm mounting lugs, but the V2 VTX has M2 mounting lugs, with the idea that you're going to be mounting it in the rear of like a 5-inch freestyle frame, and you're going to use M2 hardware to mount it. Whereas the V3 has M3 lugs, and I think the idea there is that it's going to be mounted on top of a flight control stack, which is going to be real fun to see if we can squeeze that into this racing rig, but by God, I'm going to give it a try. Here's the carnage from trying to make this work. Part of it is because you can't really get at the stack screws on the 533 switchback without taking the whole damn thing apart. And part of it is because of the janky ass way that this VTX wants to mount. Take a closer look. In order to get it mounted on top of the stack, which is like the only place it could possibly mount on this frame, I've had to do some real work to squeeze the flight controller and the VTX in, and you can see it's still too tall. It's like just these screws are going to make it not fit. So I'm going to need to actually extend these standoffs. It's not great. And it's especially not great because it's got to be above the flight controller, which means I'm going to have to take it off, solder it to the flight controller, then put it on, and it's going to be soldered there forever because this plug is not the right size to go in there. In fact, I might even get a DJI plug and splice it just to avoid that scenario. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll probably do that. So yeah, it's just not a good fit for this frame, which is a shame because this is like the de facto standard racing frame in the world today. And it's probably not going to be a good fit for a lot of other racing frames, which have similarly tight tolerances.
Okay, first flight in the race mode with 540p. We're going to see if the resolution is that much worse, and we're going to see if the latency is that much better. But before we do that, can I take 1 second to remind you that I couldn't possibly do the work I do here without the support of my patrons. Patreon is a website where you can subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month, or more if you feel like I've earned it, Think about how much value you get out of my content. Think about how much time you spend watching my content. Think about any problems I've helped you solve. And then ask yourself what that's worth to you. If it's worth $2 a month or more, head on down to the link in the video description, and I'd love to have you as a supporter. You get access to my Discord server, you get podcast downloads of my live streams, you get 24-hour early access to my videos with no ads, but mostly I just hope you get the great feeling of saying thank you and giving back for whatever I've given you, whatever that might be. And if that's nothing, if you're like, who the hell is this guy and why does he think I owe him money, then don't do it. Don't do it. Just keep watching the content. And then if eventually you feel that way, you know where the link is. Let's do it. Oh, right. There's one more difference between this video transmitter and the other one, and that's that it maxes out at 500 milliwatts. So it's really for racing. How is the latency doing? Latency seems pretty solid at 22, 23 as I fly through here. Oh, it's pretty solid. The resolution is noticeably worse. But the latency is pretty solid. Oh, there, it just jumped to 30. I don't know why. And frankly, it probably would be more fair to test this at 25 milliwatts, since that's what a racer is going to be doing. Races are going to be run at 25 milliwatts, so let's see what that's like. It's not bad. 24, 25. The latency is definitely more stable. I should really try to do some, like, tighter. Oh, the ability to see, though, is not great. Like, coming through here, it's just sort of a cluster of details, and coming in here, there's, like, nothing. That's more the exposure algorithm, though. There's something there's something I've noticed with Walksnail where, like, you'll get this coming out of the fog effect. Like here, it's dark because of the exposure algorithm, fine. But as we get in here, it lightens up. But if I'm going, like right here, you can barely see this branch because of the sort of compression. And that is worse in 540p. Let's try to go faster. Let's see if we can do a little fast. It's a little speed stuff. See? Like this branch here is just sort of getting swallowed up in the haze of the, and I think that's always true for Walksnail and DJI, but it is especially true here in the 540p mode. Ooh, there's some reaction time test there. The latency does seem more stable, though. It does seem more stable. Okay, so now everything is the same as before, but we're in 720p mode instead of 540p mode. And yeah, immediately we see a big difference in the latency. The latency is jumping 24, 25, 23, 30. I'm seeing big spikes in latency. So, yeah, definitely a big difference. Through some part, oh yeah, through some parts, like if I'm up close, I will get similar results of like 23 milliseconds. But then it's just all over the place. It is definitely less consistent. But I can also see more. Like this branch here. I got a little more detail of this branch. It's just a little bit less of sort of a cluster of pixels. And if I come through here, wow, I really think I can feel it. That's so weird. That's got to be placebo. If I come through here, it's still pretty bad, but it's slightly better as to what I can see. Wow, It's gotta be placebo. I really think I can feel it. Am I gonna become a latency junkie? Not unless I can prove it with a blind test. I don't know how I would do that. I'm going back to 540, boys. Everything's exactly the same. Now I'm back on 540. I'm just gonna fly. Oh yeah. Look how much more confident I feel. Just diving in here. I can't see what I'm freaking diving into, but I feel confident that I'll be able to get in close and be able to make last minute changes. That's really interesting. This is a really significant change. It's not going to convert people from HD0, but it is going to mean that people who want to race with Walksnail will have a much more viable option. And even people who maybe want to freestyle but feel more latency sensitive will do better. Wow. It's so weird whenever I get onto a low latency link, it just changes my whole freaking perspective on what I'm doing. And like I just start ripping stuff that I couldn't rip before, except I don't notice it the rest of the time. I don't notice how it's holding me back. But I do also, that's tough.
On all of my personal birds, I prefer to fly a link with variable latency, higher latency, and much, much better image quality. So I'll be flying the Vista, the O3, yes, or the Walksnail system. Every time I fly a low latency link, like until now, HD0, I'm amazed at just how much more fluidity I feel in the moves I'm pulling, how much more confident I feel in the ability to kind of dive in somewhere tight and not worry about having to make a last minute adjustment. I just know I can just pull that last minute adjustment off and hit the move. I just feel like a better pilot. So then why don't I fly low latency links all the time? I think what's happening is that when you fly, you sort of mold yourself into the performance and capability envelope of the quad that you're flying. And so when you fly a low latency, high resolution link, you kind of stop noticing the ways in which you're holding yourself back to compensate for the things that the video link is capable of giving you. And when you switch to something different, boom, suddenly you notice. But it's not all good, because those low latency links also, you can't always see what you're frickin' flying into. So you feel confident, you're flipping and tricking and whipping it around, and then suddenly a branch just comes out of the haze and you hit it. And if you had been flying a high latency, high resolution link, maybe you would have seen it coming. So I don't think there's a perfect answer here, but what makes this system so freaking cool is that it's the first system to give you the choice. It's the first system to give you up to 1080p if you want, with higher latency and more jitter, more change in latency, or to be able to turn it down to 540p and get, well, not fixed latency, but pretty consistent latency, noticeably more consistent latency, and you don't have to switch to a whole different video system to see if you're going to like that. And I recommend that you do try it. If you've got the Walksnail system, when this firmware is available, you 1000% should try the 540p mode, the racing mode, and you need to take a couple packs to get over the fact that the image looks worse than you're used to, and really try to push yourself to dive into tight areas and make rapid movements, and suddenly it just loosens up and you're like, whoa, this is really cool. And then if you don't like it, you can just go back. And that's what makes this so cool, because none of the other systems let you do that. DJI, you're stuck with great image quality, higher latency, more change in latency. HD0, fantastic low latency, fixed latency, not so good image quality. Walksnail gives you both, but that's the firmware. I'm really excited about this firmware. This video transmitter, I'm not so sure I see the point. So it's a tiny bit smaller than the V2 video transmitter. It only does 500 milliwatts, which if you believe Chris Rosser's results, Chris Rosser did some power testing where he found that above like 200 milliwatts, the output power doesn't even go up on the V2s. So maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe you're still getting the same amount of power as the big one. I don't know, but on paper, at least, you're getting less output power. It's not that much smaller. It's not enough smaller that I could actually get it into a racing build like this. I also probably wouldn't have been able to get the big one in here, but like, I'm not sure I see the point. If this V3 video transmitter is in fact outputting the same amount of power as the big one, even though on paper it says it's outputting less, then sure. Go for it. It doesn't have solder pads and it doesn't have a plug, so it will be a little harder to repair. Well, maybe that's a deal breaker for some people. If you have the room to fit the big one in, go with the big one. Stands to reason that the bigger one is going to be more durable, and the difference in weight and size is not that significant. If you're racing, you might decide to go with the Tiny Whoop video transmitter, which is much, much smaller, but I suspect the durability is not there. So this guy is kind of in a weird middle ground where it's not small enough to really fit into tight builds, and most of the builds that it will fit into, you could have just gone with the V2 anyway. Not sure about that. But whichever of these you decide to get, if you decide to get them, there's links in the video description below. They are affiliate links. That means that when you click that link and make any purchase, buy anything at the affiliated store, I get a little commission. An easy way for you to support the channel is to always click my affiliate links before you do your shopping, and it tells the store, hey, Bardwell sent me. Cut him in on this action. Great thing to do. Where do you go from here? Where do you go from here? What I want you to look at from here is another thing that truly makes the Walksnail system stand out, in that it has a really, really excellent low light camera. That is the video I'm going to put on a card on screen right now. As well, another low light camera, the DJI Polar, and you can see whether Walksnail or DJI seems to have a better low light system. I'll have links to those down in the video description as well. See you there.